Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Michael and Claire had been together for over 10 years. To anyone on the outside, their marriage seemed stable, mature, and free of major surprises. They lived in a rented house in a quiet Seattle neighborhood, shared household responsibilities, went out to dinner on weekends, and kept a routine that, while predictable, felt safe. They worked in different fields but always showed mutual respect for each other's space and schedules. Michael, a software engineer, had a more flexible routine and often worked from home. Claire, a project manager at a design firm, left early and returned in the late afternoon, almost always at the same time. Their life followed what you'd expect from a couple with so many years together. It was precisely because of this predictability that the first changes caught attention. There wasn't a big event, a memorable fight, or a sudden withdrawal. The shifts were silent. Michael started to notice Claire becoming more distant. She wasn't aggressive or cold, but she avoided longer conversations. Affection became rare, goodnight kisses turned into rushed touches, and lingering glances disappeared. Whenever he tried to bring up something more personal, she'd change the subject or say she was tired. Small excuses began appearing more often: last-minute meetings, dinners with coworkers, quick trips to the market that lasted longer than usual. None of it was blatant enough to seem like betrayal, but it left behind a trail of discomfort. The turning point for Michael came when Claire left her phone on the kitchen counter before heading out. It was just an ordinary morning, and he wasn't in the habit of checking his wife's phone. But when he glanced at the screen, he saw a notification disappear almost instantly, as if it had been received and deleted in the same second. He couldn't make out the content or the sender, but something about that moment stuck in his mind all day. From then on, he started paying closer attention. Without saying anything, he began noticing her arrival times, what she bought, the clothes she wore on days she claimed to be working late. He also started picking up on changes in her mood. Claire seemed to be mentally somewhere else, as if she were going through the motions while actually living in a different emotional space. Michael wasn't the impulsive type. He believed trust was the foundation of any relationship, but he also knew when someone close to him wasn't acting rationally. In the days that followed, he adopted a more analytical approach. He installed an app on his own phone that tracked the car's location, the one Claire used. Nothing invasive, just a shared tracking tool they'd used before on other occasions. He noticed certain routes didn't match what she said. On days she claimed to be at the office late, the car remained parked for long stretches in quiet residential areas with no explanation. He also saw duplicate purchases on her credit card statement and meals at restaurants he and Claire had never visited together. Even with these signs, Michael refused to jump to conclusions. Gathering evidence became almost a personal project. For weeks, he quietly collected information that, on its own, might seem irrelevant, but together formed a pattern. He observed the clothes Claire picked when she said she'd be working late. He noted her departure and arrival times, the gaps between messages and replies. He noticed her perfume had changed, that her smile when coming home had vanished, and that she seemed constantly on guard. He didn't talk about it with friends or family. He kept everything to himself, hoping he was overreacting. He wanted to believe it was just a phase, normal wear and tear after so many years together. But deep down, the unease grew. With each new detail, each suspicious clue, the certainty that something was wrong became harder to ignore. Still, there was no photo, no concrete message, no video or witness to confirm what he suspected. The most he had was a series of contradictory behaviors, odd hours, and flimsy excuses. It was like putting together a puzzle with pieces that fit, but without the picture on the box to confirm the result. That's when Michael realized he couldn't live with the doubt anymore. After weeks of gathering suspicions and indirect evidence, he decided he needed to confront Claire. He couldn't keep living in a constant state of alert. It was time to lay everything out and hear, straight from her, what was going on. Michael spent hours trying to organize his words before saying anything. He didn't want to make accusations or create a war zone at home. But he also couldn't keep swallowing the feeling of being deceived. He chose an ordinary night, a Sunday, when Claire had already showered and was getting ready for bed. He sat on the edge of the bed, looked her in the eye, and took a deep breath before starting. He spoke calmly, listing point by point what he'd observed. He told her he knew about the mismatched times, the inconsistent trips, the restaurants, the deleted messages. He didn't yell or lose control. He simply laid out, with precision and firmness, what he had noticed. Claire listened in silence at first. But when she realized where the conversation was headed, her whole posture changed. Her face transformed. Her gaze turned sharp, her breathing heavier. She cut Michael off mid-sentence and started speaking louder. What began as a defensive response turned into a direct attack. She accused her husband of being obsessive, of invading her privacy, of becoming controlling. She said he was seeing things that weren't there, interpreting every gesture as betrayal, and that this silent surveillance was already affecting her mental health. Her tone rose disproportionately, and before Michael could respond, Claire was on her feet, crying and pacing back and forth in the room, as if she were the one who'd been betrayed instead of confronted. She said she was exhausted, that she couldn't keep walking around the house like she was under surveillance. She shouted that the late-night outings had nothing to do with cheating, that she was helping a friend with depression who didn't want anyone to know. She said the silence, the rush, the strange hours were all because of someone else's pain, and she was just trying to be a good friend. She accused Michael of not trusting her, of not understanding how much she sacrificed for their relationship, and that while she worried about others, he only cared about finding flaws. The scene was so intense that for a few minutes, Michael stayed silent, stunned by the sudden reversal. She trembled, sobbed, and spoke in a desperate tone. She even said he was destroying what was left of their marriage, that this was the last straw, and that if he truly believed she could cheat, then maybe their love was already gone. That hurt. Michael found himself surrounded by a flood of accusations that, while completely disproportionate, carried an emotional weight hard to ignore. He tried to remember the facts, the inconsistencies, the signs, but none of it seemed to matter in the face of Claire's pain. The intensity of her reaction was so overwhelming that he started doubting his own perception. Michael wasn't weak, but in that moment, he felt broken down. His words, so carefully chosen, were thrown back at him as empty accusations from a paranoid person. And slowly, doubt crept in. What if she was telling the truth? What if it was all just a series of misinterpreted coincidences? What if he was letting unresolved insecurities take over? Claire kept crying, now sitting in the corner of the bed, saying she'd never felt so humiliated, so disrespected, so alone in her own home. Michael, overwhelmed by the emotional storm, ended up apologizing. He said he might have gone too far, that he didn't know how to handle the changes, and that he never meant to hurt her. Claire accepted the apology with tears, but without relief. She said she needed time to rebuild trust. Michael nodded, promising to do everything he could to fix the mistake he now believed he'd made. In the days that followed, the house returned to its usual silence, but with a different atmosphere. Claire started acting with more kindness and presence, as if she genuinely wanted to restore the connection that once seemed lost. Michael, still carrying a trace of doubt deep inside, chose to trust. He didn't want to live in constant conflict. He decided to believe he'd made a mistake. And that decision allowed them to spend the next 2 months in peace. Their routine took on a new tone. They started going out to dinner again. Claire suggested a small trip for the following month. Kisses regained their time, conversations regained their laughter. Michael, relieved, thought maybe it had all just been a scare, a poorly handled crisis. Claire, in turn, seemed lighter, more devoted. The days passed like this, carried by a false sense of reconnection, as if everything were falling back into place. It was a Friday like any other, but Michael had woken up with a different impulse. After 2 months of apparent reconciliation with Claire, he felt their relationship was finally moving toward a lighter place. They'd had dinner together twice that week. She'd surprised him with a sweet note on the fridge door, and for the first time in a long time, he wondered if he'd been unfair in his past suspicions. Determined to strengthen this new phase, he left work early to buy a simple but meaningful gift. He wanted to give it to her that night, no special occasion, just to mark a fresh start. On his way to the mall, he took a different route. He wanted to avoid traffic and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. When he stopped at a red light on a quieter street, Michael's gaze was drawn to a café across the sidewalk. It was a place he recognized but had never been to. It took just a second for everything to collapse. Through the wide window, he saw Claire sitting at a table near the glass. She was with Zach Foster, his best friend since college. What stood out wasn't just his presence, but how they were sitting, hands linked on the table, smiling, laughing like teenagers, eyes locked with intimacy and ease. The world seemed to spin backward. The gift he'd planned to buy lost all meaning. The steering wheel in his hands felt distant. Within seconds, Michael parked haphazardly and crossed the street. There was no anger on his face. What he felt was a sharp coldness, absolute clarity. He opened the cafe door calmly, walked straight to their table without looking away, and stopped beside Zach's chair. Claire saw him first. She froze. Her hand stayed on Zach's, and only after a few seconds, realizing Michael was there, did she try to pull it back. But it was too late. Michael looked at both of them, took a deep breath, and spoke firmly, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "So this is who she's been with all this time?" Zach couldn't answer. Claire tried to speak, but no sound came out. Michael continued. "You came into my house, called me brother, sat at my table, while you were behind my back with my wife." He turned to Claire, now visibly shaken. "And you, Claire? You made me believe I was going crazy, that I was destroying our marriage with suspicion. You cried, yelled, lied straight to my face. All of that to defend this?" The silence in the cafe was absolute. Some people stopped eating. Others just looked down. Claire looked stunned. Zach kept his eyes fixed on the table, as if the wood could save him. Michael took a step back, looked at them one last time, and ended with a cold statement. "You two deserve each other." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked out. There was no scandal, no shouting, no attempt to stop him. The cafe door closed behind him like a final period. Michael went home with a shattered heart, but a clear mind. He no longer needed proof or explanations. The truth had finally revealed itself right in front of him. He packed his things calmly, separated documents, clothes, and personal items, and called the landlord of the house he shared with Claire. Since it was a rental, the process was easier. He requested to terminate the lease and said he'd be out by the end of the week. He also told Claire he wanted to end the rental agreement and that she should either find a new place or sign a new lease on her own. In less than 3 days, he found a small apartment in another neighborhood, a quiet, simple place where he could breathe. Claire didn't try to contact him. She just left her keys at the real estate office, signed the lease termination papers days later, and disappeared. No more conversations. No more explanations. The betrayal Michael had only sensed now had shape, color, and name. And though pain was present in every move, there was also a strange sense of relief. Because the worst part wasn't finding out. The worst part had been doubting himself for so long. Now, he finally knew the truth. And that was all he needed to start over. In the days after the breakup, Michael stayed quiet. Not out of pride, but because he was still processing what he'd seen. He avoided talking about it, didn't respond to messages, and just focused on the essentials. But the silence didn't last long. Close friends, who had already noticed his more withdrawn behavior, started asking. First came his oldest co-workers, then the couples they used to host for weekend dinners, and finally the friends he shared with Claire. He didn't dramatize it or try to play the victim. He told them exactly what happened in that café, without embellishment, just the facts as they were. The betrayal, the affair with Zach, the scene in front of everyone, the immediate breakup. That was enough. The news spread quickly through their social circle. Everyone knew Zach, some even considered him part of the family. He was always at gatherings, birthdays, holidays. The betrayal carried double weight. It wasn't just about marital infidelity, it was about a deep breach of trust. The friends' reaction was nearly unanimous. First came shock, then distance. People who used to text Claire daily started ignoring her messages. Event invitations stopped coming. Group chats went silent. A few confronted her directly, but most just withdrew without warning. No one wanted to take sides, but neither could they pretend nothing had happened. Claire, realizing the growing isolation, tried to respond. She reached out to mutual friends, wrote long messages justifying her actions, said things weren't as simple as they seemed, that there were layers to the story. She tried to paint Michael as someone ruled by emotion, someone who overinterpreted everything. But her words found no echo. The strength of the confrontation, the impact of the public scene, and the involvement with someone so close to Michael made any excuse irrelevant. No one wanted to listen. No one wanted to get involved. And loneliness settled in quietly but definitively. Zach, meanwhile, didn't escape the consequences either. Co-workers, childhood friends, even distant acquaintances started avoiding him. He got cold stares, harsh messages, and watched doors close. What used to be an active, welcoming social network turned into a desert of interactions. Even those who didn't want to judge knew he'd crossed unacceptable lines. And in this new reality, Claire and Zach did what seemed inevitable, they decided to leave the city. The move happened fast. They found an apartment in Portland, where no one knew them. They rented a modest place far from the center, trying to start from scratch. Claire took few belongings, leaving behind almost everything tied to her old life. Zach did the same. They avoided contact with old friends, deleted social media profiles, and cut ties. In the new city, they presented themselves as an ordinary couple, newly arrived, with no complicated stories to explain. They went to cafes, local markets, and started building a shared routine. At first, there was a certain lightness in the air. As if distance had erased the traces of the past. Claire tried to smile more, Zach kept a calm demeanor, as if nothing had happened. They spent afternoons decorating their new apartment, buying simple items, picking wall colors. There was a sincere effort to start over, to make it work, to turn what began with destruction into a new phase of building. But behind every gesture was a silence neither of them mentioned, a silence made of everything they'd left behind, and which, sooner or later, would demand its price. Life in Portland didn't take long to show its cracks. Claire's initial enthusiasm gave way to a constant sense of displacement. The new city didn't feel like a fresh start, but like exile. Zach, on the other hand, seemed to adapt easily. He discovered new places without effort, made shallow friendships at local bars, and maintained a polite but distant attitude. Claire tried to fill her days with chores, small freelance projects, and solo trips to the supermarket. Slowly, she realized her life with Zach was filled with long silences and mechanical replies. The closeness they had at first faded, turning into a cold, predictable coexistence. The first clear sign of betrayal came in a mundane way. An accidental notification on Zach's phone, left on the living room table. Claire didn't want to snoop, but the message flashed long enough to make it obvious something was hidden. The name was unfamiliar, the tone intimate, the content impossible to ignore. In the following days, she watched in silence. She noticed unexplained outings, changes in habits, hushed phone calls in the bathroom. She didn't need much to confirm it. One day, when he left for a supposed work meeting, Claire decided to follow him. And what she found was the final scene of what was left of her attempt to restart, Zach walking down the sidewalk hand in hand with another woman, just as comfortable as he'd been with her months before. She waited for him to come home. She didn't cause a scene or break anything. When Zach walked in, Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on nothing. She simply asked if he had anything to say. He sighed, sat across from her, and answered with the coldness of someone who'd already rehearsed it all. He said things weren't working, that she was too intense, that the relationship had lost its spark. He confirmed he was seeing someone else and saw no point in continuing something that clearly no longer existed. He didn't apologize, didn't hesitate, showed no regret. He just stood up, went to the bedroom, grabbed a few clothes, and left. Claire stayed there, alone, sitting in the same chair for hours. The pain wasn't just about the betrayal, but about the irony of it all. She'd traded a solid, if worn, marriage for a relationship built on lies. And now, she was the one being discarded. Within days, she terminated the apartment lease and returned to her parents' house, no announcement, no farewell. The welcome was cold. Her parents didn't ask questions, just gave her the old room and returned to their routine, as if she were just a temporary guest. Old friends didn't reply to her messages. The city where she grew up now felt smaller, suffocating, full of memories that hurt more than comforted. Meanwhile, Michael moved in a different direction. Changing homes had done him good. He invested in himself, picked up old hobbies, threw himself into his work. He started therapy, not to understand Claire, but to understand himself. He wasn't in a rush to rebuild his emotional life, but gradually realized the peace he now felt was more valuable than any forced relationship. He reconnected with old friends, joined work gatherings, and above all, learned to appreciate the silence he once feared. Pain had turned into learning. And while the past still lingered, it no longer dictated the rhythm of his days. Zach, on the other hand, kept living as if nothing had happened. In Portland, he moved from one woman to the next as easily as changing shirts. No relationship lasted. No connection ran deep. He repeated the cycle of charm, involvement, and abandonment with the same coldness he'd shown ending things with Claire. Some began to notice the pattern, others stepped back before getting hurt. Zach didn't care. He wasn't looking for stability, didn't want lasting bonds. He was an empty man, filled with temporary distractions, incapable of staying long enough to build anything real. Claire, back at her parents' house, lived like a shadow of her former self. She avoided going out, spent her days in front of the computer, trying to find a reason to start over. At night, she mentally reviewed every choice, every word spoken, every chance ignored. She didn't reach out to Michael, she knew she wouldn't be welcome. She also knew he never wanted to hear her voice again. And maybe that was the harshest punishment of all, knowing no one was willing to listen anymore. That the words that once deceived now had nowhere to echo. She'd lost everything. And the pain she felt didn't come from missing Zach, but from the awareness that there was no going back. Because some losses leave no room for return. Only regret. And silence. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.